Alvvays is a Canadian indie pop band formed in 2011. I already covered their story in 2019, but I don't think that video did them justice entirely, and given the fact that they've just released their third album, Blue Rev, I thought it would be a good idea to go back and visit their entire career again, taking in a wide variety of sources, and of course, if you couldn't tell already, getting a new microphone. Molly Rankin, the band's frontwoman, is probably the best place to start this story. She was born and raised on Cape Breton Island, where she would write songs with neighbour Kerri MacLellan before moving to Halifax for university and studying theatre. Her and Kerri were lovingly labelled as the dorky twins by her father and would often spend a lot of time together. Sometime later, she would eventually move to Prince Edward Island, however. Her father in question was a fiddler for the Celtic folk family collective, the Rankin family, up until 1999. Surrounded by music, she found it easy to pick up and noodle on instruments such as the piano and fiddle. Eventually, she would go on to play at the community centres as a kid. She also played with her father at parties and became the inspiration for an instrumental of his, Molly Rankin's Reel. The Rankin family would see relative international success through the 1990s, although this would come to an end in 1999 when they released a statement saying that the band members would be pursuing separate interests. However, John Morris Rankin's life would come to an end after a freak car accident on Cape Breton Island. Whilst driving to a hockey game, his car plunged into the Gulf of St. Lawrence, possibly in an attempt to avoid a salt pile on the highway. This event would have a profound effect on a 13-year-old Molly's life, and has influenced a variety of Alvvays songs. I believe I mentioned previously that both of Molly's parents passed in this incident, but from another article, Molly mentions her mother talking about Selena Gomez, likely discrediting what I had said before. Sometime after this, Molly met Alec O'Hanley, formerly of 2 Hours Traffic, during high school, who would introduce her to Teenage Fanclub and other 90s guitar-oriented bands. Following this, she would also eventually play at the Rankin family's first reunion tour in 2007. Her and Alec would then quietly go on to release the She EP in 2010. Whilst out of university, Molly would listen to bands like The Replacements and The Smiths. During 2011, Alvvays was birthed from the desire to write jangly, shoegaze-esque songs inspired by some of their favourite bands. Kerri and Alec joined Molly alongside drummer Phil McIsaac and bassist Brian Murphy. They did stay around Charlottetown for a while, where they would write a quarter of the first album before moving to Toronto to put together their first album as a band. Whilst this was going on, Molly would also be working at a pizzeria during this time, cleaning washrooms before eventually becoming a server. They would tour heavily during this time as well, alongside Pains of Being Pure at Heart and Peter, Bjorn and John. After enlisting Chad Vangeline and John Agnello, they would begin to record their debut album in Calgary. This came to a head in the summer of 2013, where the band was putting the finishing touches on a demo cassette that would be released to concertgoers as something of a souvenir. I've seen a variety of people on Reddit discussing whether this is actually true or not, and it does seem to be true, as the band themselves in an interview do state that this cassette was given out to fans. The band were yet to secure a record label, but were adamant on being 100% sure about their album before putting it to the world. Adult Diversion demoed to the world through the internet, featuring surfy guitars and Molly's classic lyrics. That cassette with the demos would eventually become the band's debut album when they signed a deal with Polyvinyl Records, which they went on to release in July of 2014. At the time of the album's release, Molly was 27 and still working at the pizzeria in Toronto. In one interview, she seems relatively relaxed and nonchalant about her fame. Describes how the hit track from the album, Archie Marry Me, is about wanting that adventurous kind of love that leaves you in jail together. Molly also describes in an interview that Archie was named after one of her closest friends from Cape Breton, who now works as a geologist. One of the key influences for the album was Velocity Girl by Primal Scream from the C86 collection released by NME in that year. It is easy to hear the influence. Molly is also cited as being Cape Breton's #1 Oasis fan. Further influences include Dolly Mixture, Celine Dion, Pavement, Teenage Fanclub, and The Primitives. Alvvays, their debut self-titled album, would quickly rise to #1 on the US college charts on August 5th, 2014. Many of the songs in the album are filled with bittersweet, tongue-in-cheek lyrics and jangly guitars that help to resonate with those audiences especially. Songs like Archie Marry Me talk about being locked up at day but looking for trouble at night, whilst Party Police talks about finding comfort in debauchery. The whole album crafts this feeling of youth and breaking away from dictated lines. Much of the melodic style comes from Molly's influences and her past in traditional music. They continued to tour extensively following the release of the album, gaining popularity as they went, and eventually scoring spots at Glastonbury 2015 and Coachella 2016. On these extensive tours, the band were already sprinkling in new songs into the mix, as Molly would take day trips to the Toronto Islands to work in the isolation of an abandoned schoolroom. She describes being anxious to record other things, wanting to tour but also wanting to record new material. These were soon rounded off and recorded in the basement of their Toronto home, where they would use their original tape machine to record these new songs. Norman Blake of Teenage Fan Club, one of their biggest influences, was also invited to contribute on this album. Your Type was one of the earliest songs heard from their second album and would play at the start of sets between 2014 and 2015. Meanwhile, New Haircut was also played, which was later retitled Saved by a Waif. Hey was also introduced later. Not My Baby was added in 2016 as the new album approached. And finally, in early 2017, In Undertow was teased, before the whole album, Antisocialites, was released to the world in September 2017. Molly states herself that she doesn't like when a band's second album is vastly different to the first, but fancies the idea of dipping her toes in the water. This is likely why the second album is very consistent with the first, but often leans more into the shoegaze themes in songs like In Undertow, with heavy guitars and synthesizer lines. Whilst Molly often writes of little worlds, people that might mirror our reality, but might not often be real, there's an injection of personal experience in this album, especially with the song Already Gone, which likely references the scene of her father's fateful accident. Although the band continued to tour after the release of their second album, they were quiet for some time, a sense of privacy and reservedness that has been with the band since the very start. There are hints in interviews that describe the Antisocialites album as a fantasy breakup arc that almost mirrored the struggles her and Alec were going through as a couple themselves. She had also been feeling downward pressure from the music industry to become a more extroverted band leader, something she rejected to maintain her reserved self. Although never released on streaming platforms, the B-sides for the album, including Pecking Order, Supina Quine, and Echo Lilia, were released on vinyl and shared on their tours. Shortly before the release of the album, however, Phil McIsaac left the band and the music industry altogether to follow a career in graphic design. He describes how the touring life had left him unsettled and with deep depression. He also describes this as the empties. Despite this, he also states that he is very happy with where he is now. With this gap in the band, however, Sheridan Riley joined. Sheridan had previous history in a variety of bands, but was raised on 70s blues rock and bands like Led Zeppelin. Despite this, two other drummers, not including Phil or Sheridan, played on the album. Nevertheless, she joined the band on their following tours. Although not confirmed until the release of their third album and the subsequent live shows, Brian Murphy had left the band during this time to continue his career with the band Kiwi Jr. There's no clear written reason for his departure, unlike Phil, but I assume there is no ill will between Brian and the rest of the band, as Alec has contributed to some of their records. Despite extensive touring and growing support and buzz, the band described in a recent interview that they had shot themselves in the foot during this time, dodging opportunities for larger milestones like playing late night shows in exchange for their own well-being. They describe how this feels like shutting doors, but again, this was something that they chose to do for their well-being. In early 2020, however, the band announced that they would be supporting the Strokes. Sadly, this was put on hold due to the global pandemic, halting the band's progress for some time. What also halted their progress was Molly's laptop full of song ideas and demos being stolen, and a flood in their basement of their Toronto home, meaning that much of their equipment was ruined. This didn't deter the band, however. They regrouped and enlisted Abbey Blackwell, who had been roommates with Sheridan at the time, to begin recording a new album. Due to COVID restrictions on border closures, this was very difficult during this time. However, on the 21st of June, a teaser was revealed on Instagram with a segment of the song Bored in Bristol, and soon after, the single Pharmacist was released on July 6th. With this, the band reinforced the shoegaze themes of their previous albums with fuzzy guitars, and also brought the name of their new album to the world, Blue Rev. Even the name is riddled with nostalgia, referring to the sugary, caffeinated alcopop Rankin and MacLellan would drink as teens on Cape Breton Island. Cover 2 shares these nostalgic and often haunting themes the band has covered, by showing Molly with her parents. Easy on Your Own released on the 10th of August, followed by a double drop of Belinda Says and Very Online Guy on the 23rd of September. Very Online Guy in particular reinforces the tongue-in-cheek vocals the band is known for. And finally, after a 5-year wait, Blue Rev was released alongside After the Earthquake on October 7th. The band had carefully planned the album for years since their previous release, but most of this careful planning went out the window when they arrived at a Los Angeles studio with producer Sean Everett. On their second day in the studio, they played the album front to back twice. As he had done with the War on Drugs, he and the band then went back and filled in the cracks to build their magnum opus. Blue Rev saw a greater input from Kerri MacLellan and their new rhythm section, an album so deeply rooted in their core but so fresh and exciting that it proves that this band is truly something magical. The lyrics run away with themselves, ode to Molly not caring as much now about what people think. It's filled with references to Belinda Carlisle, Tom Verlaine, Morrissey and internet culture as a whole. Molly continues to describe the care put into the album and the dynamic her and Alec have when songwriting. Their almost perfectionist nature contributed wildly to this album, although the vocals to Pomeranian Spinster were apparently recorded in Molly's shed, the only take that existed. Despite the delays and troubles, they finished the album when they wanted it to be finished. So here we are again, watching as the band march forward with more and more tour dates in Canada, in what can only be described as a victory lap after a world tour. I have to ask, however, what is next? Perhaps it's too soon to say, having only had Blue Rev for 2 weeks at this point, but the completeness of this album when viewed from the perspective of their entire discography leaves a lot to the imagination. Given how eager Molly was to write new songs when their debut album had released, it is likely that this hunger for new material will continue. Either way, it seems like Alvvays aren't going anywhere for the time being, with a fantastic evolved sound both in and out of the studio. There's so much more I could say, with so many little details and references and jokes and such, but there's not enough time for me to cram all of that in. I hope I've done this band justice in this video and added to what I said in my previous documentary. I think I'll just close this video out with a massive thank you to everyone who supported my Alvvays content over the past few years. It's really helped to define and grow my channel, and that has really meant a lot. I'll likely be doing some more Alvvays guitar covers at some point, but I'm not sure when. With the recent album lacking as many guitars as their first and second, it's unlikely that there is as much for me to do as there was before. And again, I've recorded a full bass cover of the new album, but that has been copyrighted and blocked globally, so I'm deciding whether to release that as separate videos or not. I'm not entirely keen on that idea because I don't want to flood my channel, but yeah. But yeah, just again to close this video out, this band has become something very special to me. Much of my younger teens were dedicated to bands like Yesayer, who have since disbanded, and so Alvvays has helped fill that sort of indie music hole in my life. And also the hole left behind by sort of classic rock bands, where I've exhausted their catalogues, like bands like Queen and Status Quo. I first heard of Alvvays when I was at university, struggling with like loneliness and depression often, and so they felt like this sort of island apart from that. Although their songs are melancholic and often self-deprecating in places, they feel like something I could that I could hold on to, kind of thing. And after losing touch with them over the pandemic and finding myself again, really, I finally reconnected with the band in a major way. I mean, it's been a tough year for a lot of people. It's been a tough 3 years, I would say, since the last documentary with, again, the pandemic and political struggles. And so it feels nice to have something still to look forward to, still to go back to every now and then. And I think that's really the beauty of music. But yeah, I will continue to make content as much as I can. And yeah, Alvvays has given me so much, and it's given so many people so much. I went to a concert in Birmingham the other week, and just the joy on people's faces, the joy that the band feel as well, it's really something special. And so to Molly, Alec, Kerri, Sheridan and Abbey, and all the other previous contributors to this incredible band, massive thank you. And I think I speak for the whole of the Alvvays community and I guess the music industry as a whole, you know? So yeah, and finally to the audience, thank you for watching. My name's been Will, and I'm sure I'll see you again very soon, whether that be in a guitar cover or whatever else. Yeah. Cheers.